Hi, everyone. We're just gonna wait a few more minutes while everyone joins. While we wait, please go ahead and drop the age of your child into the chat and tell us what's currently your toughest bedtime battle. And we'll start in about 1 minute. Oh, I see some people coming in. All right, and it's officially 12:02, so we're going to start. Hi, on behalf of Vivi, I'm so happy to welcome you today. I'm Asia Hunter Mueller, the Learning and Curriculum Manager here at Vivi, and I'm excited to talk to our friends at Cooper Parenting about one of the hottest topics so far for many parents of young children, sleep. Here at Vivi, we get to be part of families' lives during those first few years of learning and growing, and that often includes a journey to develop healthy sleep habits. It's very rarely easy, and I can tell you that in all my conversations with parents, whether they have infants, toddlers, or preschoolers, bedtime is almost always one of the toughest parts of the day. So whether they're working on sleep training, creating routines, or just getting their preschoolers to stop coming out of their room and asking for the 100th glass of water. So today we're lucky to be joined by Muriel Benjamin, LCSW and Director of Groups at Cooper Parenting. She not only has experience working with children and families, but she's a parent, so she knows this topic intimately. Together, we're going to do our best to address some of your pressing questions about sleep and so much more.
Yay! Thanks.
Of course. So, if you're not already familiar with Vivi, I'll give you a quick overview of what we do. Vivi is on a mission to reinvent childcare and early learning for today's families. We currently have 7 campuses in and around New York City, including a brand new campus in Westchester, woo. And they specialize in learning and care for ages 6 weeks to 5 years old. We also partner with employees of all sizes to bring childcare and early learning to working parents as a benefit. And we truly believe it's our mission to support the whole family, not just with high quality learning and care, but also with education and resources for those early years, which is why we're hosting this conversation today. So before we get started, I wanted to share a few program logistics, and then we'll go ahead and we'll dive right in. First, I just want to say that I appreciate that so many of you are here today. I know you have many things going on, so we're very grateful that you could carve out some time to join us. We'll have about 45 minutes together. I'll use the first 30 minutes to run through some really thoughtful strategies and tips with Mariel, and then we'll go through some of your questions. The chat function is open and I can see things coming through, so that's great. So feel free to drop in a question anytime during the webinar, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have together. And finally, I just want to acknowledge that sleep is a huge topic, and there's just no way we can cover everything in 45 minutes, but I promise that you're going to walk away with at least one practical, applicable tool that will help you feel more equipped for whatever is coming your way. And with that, we're going to dig in. Muriel, I'd love for you to jump into your slides and give everyone an overview of what they can expect from our conversation today, and then share a little bit about what we mean when we talk about bedtime battles.
Will do. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everybody for having me. I'm Marielle. Those are the humans I'm responsible for. There's also a dog in there who's my third child. Today, a little bit about Cooper. We're partnering with Vivi today to be lucky enough to be here to offer education. Parenting education and support is all that we do. So if you're interested at all, reach out anytime and we can tell you about parent groups and other options that we have available. I think for most of us, if you're on this call today, and myself, my kids are much older. They're 9 and 12, and I still dream that I got 8 hours of sleep, and this cartoon still resonates with me. So it's not in a depressing way, it's just in an ever evolving way. Sleep is always something, as Asia said so well, that will be on our mind, right? Always, age and stage, we will be talking about sleep. And when we focus on sleep, I think a really good way to sort of level set for you is that it is actually one of the most important things our children need. So it isn't an indulgence. It isn't like a nice to have. It is actually a biological necessity. Kids grow and learn and make memories while they are sleeping. So whether you are talking about kids who are newborn babies who have so much growing and developing to do and need a ton of sleep, or toddlers who need so much sleep in order to be able to use those executive functions during the day and regulate all of their many moods, all the way up until teenagers, where we talk about not being able to grow tall if you don't get enough sleep, right? Because you actually grow while you sleep and emit human growth hormone while sleeping. We need to prioritize sleep. And as parents, that can be really tricky because, of course, our children's sleep butts up against our own. So it's a really important role we take on. And the best news about it, like with all things in the parenting space, which is why I love working in this space so much, it is never too late to repair. So if you are on this call and you are like, months and weeks have gone by and everything is a mess and everything's destroyed and my baby hasn't been sleeping, and we can fix it. You can come back to it. Repair is always possible. And it's actually one of the things that strengthens parent-child relationships the most, is to be able to have a repair, come back together, find that cohesion after we've had a hard time. So as I mentioned, sleep is what central to our development. Sleep disruption is hard. And also daytime sleep is a real thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about naps, especially in the context of being in school setting, but also just how that works. We're not only talking about overnight sleep. And we are definitely talking about consolidated sleep, wanting our kids to have big, long stretches of sleep. But it isn't, if you are co-sleeping, if you are doing other kind of sleeping arrangements, it is possible to get consolidated sleep with many, many different scenarios. So I really importantly want everyone to know on this call, there isn't one right way to do sleep. It just has to be a way that gets everybody in the house enough sleep. So I think I'm going to hand it back to Asia for a second to talk a little bit about what this looks like at school.
Yes, thank you, Mariel. I really love this slide because there's a picture of a very happy baby. And part of that is because he's well rested. We know that Vivi and daycare and caregivers in general, it's really integral. It's a really integral part of your child to have your child's day to have healthy sleep. And here at Vivi, we of course have some rules and regulations that we must follow in terms of napping. But we really also value sleep and put an emphasis on making sure our kids get the sleep that they need. So sleep schedules at Vivi change by age. So in our infant classrooms, children are sleeping on demand, right? When they're tired, we put them to sleep. And that's just because that's what's best for children. And also we've had, times where parents ask about like sleep training or like waking kids up from, or, not letting children sleep, which is, as you can imagine, like difficult to do in a group setting, right? Like all my other friends are sleeping, but I can't sleep. So, right. Like not putting the child to sleep in a group setting when they're visibly tired is something that we're unable to do, but we do ensure that the rooms are sleep ready for children. And in toddlers, we go from, and that's starting at 1 year old, we go from children sleeping on an individualized schedule to sleeping more on a group schedule. So generally when children first turn 12 months, they still might be doing like a 2-nap system. And that is something that we help parents with and support while the first few months when they're in the classroom. And then we see really like everyone kind of getting on that afternoon nap time schedule. And then as children get older, as they go into the 3s and 4s classrooms, they're also having a nap time in school, but it's a little bit shorter, and they go down to rest a little bit later. So they usually will do like their lunch, their routines for care, going into the potty and things like that, and then some kind of like decompression routine before they lay down on their mats for rest. So the classrooms have either set nap time schedules or they work with individualized care or on an individualized schedule for infants. But whatever room your child is in at Vivi, we really make sure that we're getting individual needs met, as long as like we stay in compliance with regulations and all of those things. And so every child is different in their transitions, and there's always a conversations with parents that teachers are going to have about your child and the process and their routines at home, and how we can not have those routines be exactly the same, but how the routines at school can support the sleep routines at home. And yeah, we use sleep routines to build routines. So just like everything else at Vivi and in our programs, going to rest is a routine for learning. It's a routine for adaptive care skills or self-care skills. So as children get older, they're getting their own mats, they're putting their sheets on the bed, they're laying down, and they're soothing. They're either being co-soothed by a teacher, or we're like helping them self-soothe. And I think the other really important point to point out, a topic to point out about this, is that we are very, our teachers are really good about communicating children's sleep to families, right? So we like clear communication and transparency. We share everything about a child's day with parents on Brightwheel, so you can build upon those successes at home. So that's what sleep really looks like at school, Muriel. What should sleep look like at home?
So we're going to go through some of the healthy sleep habits, which I see. Thank you to everybody putting messages in chat and Q&A. We've definitely got a nice range of ages and things going on, but these really apply at all ages. So the first one is, like Asia just mentioned, a tight routine. And I see in the chat already the struggle with a toddler to have a tight routine who needs just one more book and a little bit more water and another rub and another story, right? But we want to have a very tight and familiar routine because our brains love patterns. And for young children, and even starting in infancy, patterns that repeat are easier to predict and they're easier to regulate ourselves around. So if I know what bedtime looks like every single night, I'm less likely to fight against it because I just know what's coming. It's just always the same. And it helps me to actually prepare, anticipate, and collect myself. So we want to have a nice routine. I always joke that we start off somewhere when we're on maternity leave and we're home with our babies, and we start off with like a 2 hour sleep routine where there's a song and a dance and a feeding and a diaper change and another song, right? And we have to get it to a place that feels tolerable for you. I think your bedtime routine should be a maximum of 45 minutes, right? Like just that wind down, but figuring out what that looks like for you and where your lines are going to be so that the routine is really consistent. It's 2 books, right? And one song, and then this much time so that you actually know what it's going to look like. And we can talk about having a little sleep schedule that your children can see for the toddlers can also be really helpful. If you're getting a lot of pushback against that routine, then maybe having a little picture example, like I know they have in classrooms at Vivi, of what the schedule is going to be, can help so that you can say, okay, there's my picture of 2 books. That's all we get, right? And then we move on. I think hand in hand with that is that we need to have a consistent bedtime. Our bodies and our circadian rhythm work best when we go to sleep around the same time every night. It's true even for adults, so that we actually get those healthy sleep patterns. And we want to make sure it's early enough. I already saw in the chat, like taking 45 minutes to sleep. 45 minutes to fall asleep is totally normal. But if that means that your child's bedtime is getting too late, then you might need to put them to bed earlier. One of the best ways to recapture sleep, let's say you have an early waker, is to put your child to bed earlier. And although it seems like to us adults that if you went to bed earlier, you would wake up earlier, it's actually the opposite. When you're overtired, you're more likely to wake up early and to have what we professionally call junkie sleep, right? Just that idea you don't sleep as well when you're overtired. You've produced so many hormones or adrenaline and cortisol to stay awake, and so that wind down can be harder to do. And so actually an early bedtime before kids are overtired can be one of the most important things to do in a healthy sleep routine. And I know that is very hard for working parents. Sometimes we get home in the door and it's already bedtime, and sometimes we destroy our kids' bedtime routine by showing up right with the visitor at the last book. But it is something to think about if you're trying to reset sort of healthy habits. The next one I would say is a biggie. Your child needs to learn how to fall asleep on their own. So even starting from birth, when we rock our babies to sleep or feed them to sleep, then all of the waking that they have throughout the night, the normal, typical waking that we all have, they expect the conditions to be the same to fall back asleep. So if I fall asleep with my mom laying in my bed, I expect her to be there when I wake up at 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., right? And that those are the conditions I've become used to. So again, one of the first things you can do if you're considering sleep training and you're in the early stages, or if you're just trying to rework that bedtime battle now, is to let your child fall asleep on their own. And that might mean you do 90% of the work and they just do the last 10%. But that's the part, that's the muscle that we want them to practice. Because if I can master the idea of falling asleep that last 10% on my own, I can do that again throughout the night. And that's why sometimes you hear parents who are dealing with bedtime struggles, if they can nail going to sleep at 7 p.m., they have a lot less problem throughout the night. The next one is really to think about screens. For those of you with kids who are already watching screens or exposure to screens in the house, we know that screens can be so stimulating. We have data that they are just as stimulating to your toddler as a shot of espresso is for you. And just like you may not have a shot of espresso after dinner at night, I mean, I can't even imagine, we don't necessarily want our children to be that stimulated. So the research would say 3 hours. I think if that feels totally impractical, let's go with an hour, right? But we want as much time between screens and bedtime. And I know if you have multiple children and you're putting a baby down and that toddler just needs to watch a screen while you're doing it, I absolutely get it. But I would want you to consider that as one of the factors that may interrupt bedtime. The other thing about screens is depending on how well your child comes off them, it may create a meltdown for you, which is now this big bedtime struggle that we're talking about today, right? And some of that may just be because your child's so dysregulated coming off a screen. The Daniel Tiger episode ends and it's just like, oh, chaos, chaos, like everything is wrong with them. And now I have to try to settle this child to go to bed. So we have to remember that screens for our children don't always work the way they do for adults, where like I can fall asleep watching television, right? And so for that reason, we have to consider that sort of stimulation a little bit differently. We want to remember to keep sleep areas as dark, as quiet, as peaceful as possible. That is a challenge in New York City. But if you are not using blackout shades or a white noise machine, or if you have room sharing, considering how to keep the environment with the least amount of stimulation can be an important thing. Sorry, Asia, were you going to say something? Did I interrupt you?
No, you
Oh,
didn't.
okay. Sorry.
No, it's sorry. Well, now that you told us what help you
Oh,
sleep,
okay.
I was making sure you were done, Mary.
Yes, of course.
Um, so now that we know what healthy sleep looks like, thank you for that. But I can tell you from some of our questions we got before the webinar that even when you do all of those things, there are still plenty of sleep issues that come up. So here's a question that we got from a parent. We
Right.
just can't shake the 5 a.m. wake ups with our 10-month-old. Everyone has different advice. Less naps, more naps, go to bed earlier or later. So many variables. Is it a phase, a regression, anything we can try differently? Can you talk about early wakings and other common sleep issues during the ages of 0 through 5?
Yes. So early wakings, I feel for this parent who asked this question because it is a combination of so many different factors. So there's not one magic answer. Early waking can be your child's natural disposition. I have an early waker. It stinks. I don't know what else to say about it, except that I'm a bit of an early waker. So now we've come to understand each other. But it is very challenging. After about 5:30, it is acceptable to be awake, as in it is some baby's natural sleep cycle that they would be awake at that time. So we just want to make sure our expectations of getting a baby at 5 a.m. to fall back asleep. So again, I would target bedtime instead. I would look at the fact that early waking is largely related to being, if it's not their natural state, it's largely related to being overtired. So I would move that bedtime up earlier. I think you said this was a 10-month-old baby, but for sure, staying up later will not equal sleeping later. They are not a teenager. We're not there yet, right? So an earlier bedtime. I would switch to an overnight diaper. If any of you are out there without an overnight diaper, waking up from feeling wet can be another reason that you get middle of the night or early waking, especially around that 5 a.m. So I would also make sure that you have a good overnight diaper and maybe even a diaper pad that they sell, like the giant maxi pad looking version that's like a booster pad for the diaper to ensure that it's not that. You can look at other things like noises in the room or anything else that might be happening at that time. And then I would look at how your child is when they wake up. Do they wake up crying? Do they wake up perfectly happy and ready to start the day? And get a sense of how it ties into their temperament and how this might be their natural rhythm, or this is definitely a sign of a sleep deficit. And then, of course, in terms of the question about naps, and a little bit challenging, of course, with school and caregivers and all different kinds of things, is to try to reset the day based on how early they wake up. So if you're waking up that early, you're having a bedtime that early, you're probably napping a little bit earlier, and you may be the kid who hangs on to multiple naps a little bit longer to compensate for that early waking and trying to stay up that many hours in a day. So moving past early waking, and happy to circle back to it if that person is here and we didn't answer all the things. That brings us to nap changes. So we're going to give you a whole handout on nap changes so that you don't have to um, we don't have to go over all of it today when we don't have so much time, but the idea that every time we are moving to a new nap schedule, as Asia referenced, it can be really tricky. Taking a really tired kid and trying to push them 20 minutes at a time to a later bedtime is not an easy thing to do, especially not in a group setting. But trying to figure out how to get your children the most amount of sleep. So when you look at sleep guidelines and you read something like children should have between 14 and 18 hours of sleep, like the range in that is cumulative. So that's in a 24-hour cycle. So you want to start with what your nighttime sleep looks like to figure out how much sleep your children need during the day. And then anytime after about 3 to 4 months, you want to start to organize that into naps, right? And going from 4 naps in the beginning to 3 solid naps, that third nap, which sort of becomes a cat nap and then disappears, to 2 naps, 2 naps to one, and then ideally our kids are napping at least up until age 3, although some are napping much longer. I personally would still take a nap every afternoon if someone let me. So really figuring out how we get them their total sleep. And again, happy to troubleshoot. You have a lot on your handout, but happy to troubleshoot what those interruptions look like as our kids are dropping naps. Just to sort of call out, the morning nap is usually going to be the one of best quality that lasts the longest and becomes that middle of the day one nap. So when you're thinking of things like where should that nap be and what should that nap look like, you want those conditions to be the best. And then for other naps in the day, this is life and we have to be practical, and maybe it's on the go or maybe it doesn't look quite the same, but we're doing our best to try to ensure sleep throughout the day. Understanding that being super overtired at bedtime will only make things worse. So daytime sleep really does inform nighttime sleep. And then, of course, one of our other big issues, which I saw something in the chat about, is transitioning to a big kid bed. So if any of you, I don't want to take too much time because, again, I don't know if this is happening for everybody, but if any of you are in that stage, we love for toddlers to stay in the crib as long as possible. Sometimes they just decide to break out a little bit earlier and you have to do this transition against your will. Other times there's other stuff going on in the house or they're just aging out of the crib, and so you're thinking about transitioning. In general, we need kids to have good self-regulation and impulse control in order to be able to keep their bodies in a bed. So as long as you can wait, the better. Ideally, you're waiting till around 3 to try that transition because 3-year-olds are a little bit more able to follow the rules than 2-year-olds are, for example. But it's a very personal decision and it's different for every family. What you sort of want to set up is like, what are the rules around being in a big kid bed? What does that environment look like for you around safety? And then how are you going to redo the bedtime to allow for a new environment where your child can escape if they want to? And so for many of us, that changes sort of what the bedtime routine looks like when they can come out versus us just walking out a door, right? So it gets a little more complicated. I think like
Okay.
the word, oh, sorry. Oh, you go.
No, it's okay. I love that you're diving in. So I just want to tell everyone, this next section, is this, let's see. Yes, ma'am. Okay. This next session addresses a question that we get most of out of any of the questions: sleep regression. When does it happen? Why does it happen? And probably the most popular search on Google for parents and of young children. What do I do about sleep regression?
Yes. And I have such mixed feelings about this regression word as a concept because it is developmentally appropriate at different stages and cycles to have issues with sleep. And so I think I want parents to understand it more like a step on the way forward than that our kids are going backwards and losing a skill that they already had. I think a developmental frame on it is saying, like, when you reach a new milestone, when there's something big happening in your brain or your body, it influences your sleep. P.S. It does for you too as grown-ups, right? If you're starting a new job and you're having trouble sleeping because you have so much on your mind, it's not that different than the start of imagination and your kids being able to understand cause and effect and how things work in the world. So it's a really important way to sort of respect and honor why there's a disturbance in sleep rather than just to think, your child has fallen backwards and doesn't have a skill they once had. So developmental milestones, it's normal. When they start being able to pull up to stand, they're going to stand in their crib. When they get more words, they're going to talk to themselves instead of falling asleep, right? And this is normal for us to see. It includes everything like getting fears, which happens around age 3 if anybody's having nightmares around, out there in the audience. But all of these kinds of milestones we see in sleep and we want to take seriously. It doesn't mean that we change our sleep. So the big theme on the end of all of this is that it doesn't mean we're going to change anything we're doing. It just means we might understand it differently, and we might try to get at some of the causes or some of the tweaks we could do that would make us more successful in our bedtime battle. Teething is, of course, another one. Babies being uncomfortable, also our perception of how uncomfortable they are, and what we choose to do is those interventions and gnawing on the crib and all those kinds of things. Separation anxiety, which is a big one, which is a lot what we see in the bedtime battle section, because a lot of it is like just a little more, just a little more, and parents start to feel concerned that it's actually a response to their separation during the day. And so how can we find other times to be with our children that aren't about stretching out the bedtime routine? Changes in environment and routine, going to a new school, moving, having a new sibling in the house, your parents going back to work, any of those kinds of things that are disruptive can be reflected in sleep. We talked a little bit about the negotiation. That's welcome to toddlers, right? Trying to find control wherever you can have it. And then, of course, illness or discomfort. So every time your child is sick, you might need to redo your sleep routine. And that's because maybe they were coughing so much at night, you slept in their bed with them that night, or they weren't feeling well, and so they slept in your bed, or maybe you were in and out giving them medication all night long, and now they're waking up, right? All of that is recoverable, but it's all a disruption. Every time you travel, you go to a different time zone, or you're at somebody else's house or in a hotel, all of that are normal disruptions. And having that strong routine that's really familiar and grounded at home makes it easier to return from any of that with a couple of days of back to your routine. So 3 solid days of a routine, and we should be able to break a lot of these patterns that come naturally from illness or discomfort or travel or any of those other sort of surprises.
Wow, so much valuable stuff in here. Thank you, Muriel. I know you created a few handouts for our audience with some great tips about healthy sleep habits and another on giving up naps. My
Yes.
colleague Jessica is going to drop the links into the chat now so everyone here can go ahead and download it.
Awesome. And I know we have some questions, so I want to make sure that we get to it. But just quickly, these strategies, when you're in the regressions we just talked about, you're going to stick to that routine. You're going to anticipate needs. So if I know you always ask for a snack and another water and 3 more hugs, I'm going to front load making sure, okay, last call in the kitchen. Does anyone need a snack? This is the end, and the kitchen has gone to sleep. Hey, look, there's a water right there for you, right? So we are getting in front of meeting our kids' demands. If we wait for our kids to ask something and then we do it and then we ask and then sometimes we do it and then they ask again and then we think about doing it, we're actually just increasing that muscle that's around negotiation versus having very clear communication about what our expectations are and what we want to do. Deciding on a plan together is extremely important. If you are putting your child to sleep with a co-parent, you need to decide, like, hey, we're not staying here for 6 books, right? Because if dad says yes to 6 books and mom says no, all we've taught our child is that there's some space in there, right, to negotiate. And again, it's not because our children are misbehaving. It's because it's a learned response to us creating that there might be that space. And then, as with everything in sleep, you need to really commit to trying a new strategy for at least a week in order to see. So for that early riser, we're going to be putting that baby to bed, maybe as early as 6:30, right? And we're going to put that baby to bed for a week at 6:30 and see how the morning wake up time changes. We're not going to do it for one night and then evaluate whether it was a win or a loss. And same with routine, right? If we're going to try to break something, we have to be consistent with whatever's new so our children get some time to get used to that and we can actually see. And generally, like night one might be okay. Night two might peak in being really horrible, sometimes also in night three, and then we start to see that it gets a lot better. So our kids can get used to things, as can we. If you're a person who has trouble setting routines for your own life, then obviously this is more challenging to do for your child too. But I urge you to sort of prioritize what feels like it works for your family. And if what works is that your baby is asleep or your toddler is asleep so that you can do all the other things you need to do, then you have to prioritize it, right? So it isn't something magical as much as it's whatever feels like it works the best for you. So we've definitely talked through this troubleshooting, but just thinking through being sensitive to your child's needs is not the same thing as having no limits. So not that this talk today is about parenting styles, but when you think about parenting styles in the research, we want to have a balanced approach, right? That authoritative approach, which is limits and sensitivity, and they work back and forth. So we can be sensitive. I know you really want mommy to sing you another song. I totally get that. But it's time to go to sleep. Sleep is important for their bodies, and I'll see you in the morning, right? So I'm sensitive to you, and I have a limit, which is I'm not going to sing that song. And very often when it comes to sleep, we confuse them. We go really extreme, which is totally fine if that's your style, or we go really sensitive, again, totally fine if your style. But generally, to get your child to do an outcome they're not naturally doing it, you're going to need a blend of both. And you want to preserve that relationship, that sensitivity, that responsive parenting that you have while trying to have some rules about sleep. Again, because we know that it's an important parenting job. We did the healthy sleep. I think for self-soothing, figuring out what the calm down techniques are that work well for your child. So like the screens might be too stimulating. What does help them calm down? Do they get too wild if they play right before bed? Does reading work for them or does it aggravate them? What does that look like so that you can help teach your child good self-soothing skills as they grow? Our children learn how to soothe by being soothed. So that experience of their brain feeling soothing actually makes it easier for them to be soothed in the future, starting in infancy. So we want to think about individually what helps my child soothe. And that won't be the same if you have multiple children. It's not even the same for all of your children. So that's a sort of interesting sweet spot to try to figure out what helps them, and then can I do more of that? Is it the bath? Is it a massage? Is it the reading? What does that look like? So I'll stop so we can do some questions. Let me stop the share. And Asia, tell me when
Okay.
you want me to start off. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a few interesting and wonderful questions coming in, so
Great.
I'll read them off and let you give us your expert
I'll try
I
my
don't say
best.
opinion, these are facts. Okay. So first question. I fear what's to come with daylight saving times because
Mm.
I have told my toddler it's time to come inside and start our bedroom routine, bath, brush teeth, book, going to sleep, because the sun is going down. So it's time to
Ooh,
sleep. Now that
okay.
there will be more light in the evening, any suggestions on how to deal with this? This is a good question.
That's a great question. It is hard to control the sun. Um, and also, I will say daylight savings was just totally invented to make parents miserable. So I so feel you. It's just an awful transition. The best part about toddlers is that they can't tell time reliably or very well. And so I think you just need to shift the sun language to be around a time, right?
Mhm.
And you can do that in lots of different ways. You can get a day night clock that does the like yellow blue, and you can pick what times it does yellow and blue, by the way, in case you didn't know that. So like all of a sudden it's blue and it's time to go to sleep or start our routine. And some of them even have an in between. I will be honest, I don't think your kids will respond to the colors in like stay in their bed because it's still blue. That's a hard thing to do for a lot of them with impulse control, but they do cognitively understand the concept, right? The clock got blue, and so it's nighttime. And I think if you can shift away from the sun for that reason, that will do you a lot of good. That said, all of us have different summer bedtimes. Whether we're traveling, whether it's because the camp day is school day is longer, whatever we're doing, many of us find that that summer bedtime gets later, and then we have to do that readjustment for the fall. So if that works for you and you want to make that adjustment later, you definitely can do it. With your child, you'd want to do it in really slow increments so you could make sure not to lose the sleep on the other end. But also, you need to leave yourself plenty of room to reverse that on the other end. So let's say you're traveling and you're going to do really late, stay up late with the sun kind of thing. You're going to need some time to walk that back. So I would make it really dark in that baby's room. I would get the clock to suggest that the night does not always correspond with the sun. And I would do it in small increments and stages with daylight saving so that you don't have to compensate for that whole hour all at once.
That's great. Okay. We haven't, I love timers, by the way. We use a lot of visual timers in the classroom.
Yeah.
Okay. So this one says possibly controversial. Isn't it natural for our babies to want slash need us for sleep? They feel strongly that our culture pushes adult slash mature behaviors onto our children so quickly and so soon. My 22-month-old falls asleep on her own, but she developed the skill naturally about 1 year ago without us forcing it on her.
Great. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think this is a situation where everybody needs to feel that out for themselves. And we don't have any data to suggest that one style of sleep learning is better than another. And we also have no data to suggest that any style of sleep learning is harmful to children. So I think while some parents may feel like something that is more extreme, like teaching them to fall asleep on their own earlier versus having them come to it naturally works better for them, then that's great. Then, by all means do that. I don't think any of us should be in the business of telling each other, what we have to do for sleep. So again, if your baby's sleeping well and you like your routine, then go forth, right? I think this is more if you want to make a change and you're trying to figure out how to do that, then you might need to do some sort of teaching along the way. I will say that all strategies to get your children to fall asleep on their own don't involve crying. So I think that's another misconception is some amount of crying, you need to decide what you're comfortable with, but there are other ways to help our kids learn to fall asleep. Um, for example, if you're waiting, especially if you're waiting till they're longer and you're doing frequent checks in and out in between, you can definitely get your children to maybe do that last 10% again on their own. So that sounds like that for that person it's working really well, so I'm happy for them that it worked out. For others, it may never work out, that your kids come to it naturally and you might have to do something, but I don't think there's a judgment there, just whatever works.
Okay. And you address like the 45 minutes to fall asleep, but
Yes.
this question is more when a child takes even longer than that. So our toddler too stays in her bed after lights out, but takes over an hour to fall asleep. We have a great bedtime routine, and lights out for us is 8:15 p.m. now, since earlier bedtime caused her to spend over an hour and a half to fall asleep. She wakes up between 6:30 and 6:45. She wakes up by herself. Any tips on getting her to fall asleep earlier?
So if I'm understanding it correctly, the earlier bedtime took even longer for her to fall asleep. I'm surprised by that. I mean, again, I don't, if 45 minutes is normal, you're not in, I think it was an hour and a half,
It's
Ava.
now, yeah,
Something
sometimes
like
an
that.
hour and a half.
So I think that's a really long time. I would suppose that that would be because this baby is overtired, right? Because again, if you've ever tried to pull an all nighter and then you try to crash, it's very hard to fall asleep after you've produced all of that cortisol to stay awake. So I wonder if there's a sweet spot of doing the routine earlier and trying consistently an earlier bedtime and seeing if that helps. We all have like our natural sleep window. Again, to think about it in yourself is a little bit easier sometimes in your kids, but sometimes we'll see our kids come home from school and at 4:45, like they are so exhausted. They could lay their head down on the table and fall asleep, right? They're so tired. And then they get that second wind and then a third wind. And so we're looking for where her natural, I don't remember how old this baby was. If you told me 2.5, maybe 2.5.
Yeah.
We're looking for where her natural sleep window is. And so you may notice, like, if you put her down at 7, she falls asleep right away. But if you put her down at 7:30 or the 8 or the 8:15, then you're seeing that it takes a really long time. That said, I feel like if she's pleasant and happy in her bed falling asleep, it's not the worst bedtime battle that I've ever heard. So I would play with a little bit earlier, but I would also give her a ton of credit for being able to stay in her sleep space and be calm and do all of that on her own. I think those are great skills for learning to fall asleep on her own. And again, depending how much sleep she's getting during the day, that 10 hours she's getting at night may be okay with her nap schedule.
Okay, this next question is about pacifiers. We
Okay.
have a 10-month baby girl, 10-month-old baby girl. We only use the pacifier when she is sleeping, traveling in stroller or the car. We do not want her relying on the pacifier to sleep when she is older. Would like to wean her off earlier versus later. Wondering if there's any advice on how to wean off a baby or a child if they're relying on a pacifier to sleep. How old should they be when they start weaning?
Again, very personal discussion. I think we have a lot of data. Pacifiers are extremely soothing. Sucking is one of the best ways to self-soothe that our babies can have. I think you mentioned that it's other places than the crib right now. So for a
Yes.
10-month-old, I would move the pacifier only to the crib as a first step. So pacifiers can interfere with our children's language development because we basically they plug themselves instead of talking through feelings and emotions that they're having. And also in doing all of the other activities in the day, we want them to be able to learn how to cope with those feelings and not necessarily soothe themselves, right? So if they're upset, if they're cranky, we want to know about that. And just keeping the pacifier in the sleep space, so in the crib, let's say, makes a lot of sense. And I would do that, for anybody out there about 5 months of age. So pacifiers live in the crib. Your children can wave to them and see them and keep them there. And then they only get used when your child is falling asleep. As far as when to remove that, again, I don't see a need for you to go ahead and interrupt that right away. Orthodontics are going to happen basically no matter what you do, just as a FYI, with 2 children in braces and a palate expander and all the other things. It happens. So I don't know that I would try to pull it now, only because if it's really working for your child, it is such a great soother and it's so closely connected emotionally to sleep. So I might reconsider that when your child is a little bit older and can actually understand a little bit more what's going on, like between 18 months and 2.5 years old, if you want to do that. Also, you could wait and see when your child naturally tires of it, which some children do. And then also, you can definitely sort of I think do more to talk about other ways to soothe yourself as your child's a little older. So giving them something else. Now, if you remove it, they may just find their thumb, which is very hard to get rid of afterwards, right? So I think you're a little early at 10 months. I would leave the pacifier alone, but restrict it just to the crib.
Okay, amazing. Okay. So we're gonna take one last question that just came in. Um, it's piggybacking off the last one. So my child is in a similar situation to the question that was just asked about the toddler that takes an hour or more to fall asleep on his own. Um, this child does well, but gets frustrated at times and calls the parents back in. Do you recommend giving him a Tony box or Yodo for entertainment, or would that create a sleep crutch?
Well, I'm not, a sleep crutch, like we all have sleep crutches. And in some ways, we're not worried about creating a habit as long as it's a habit we can live with. And then when we want to change it, we'll change it. Like, life moves that way. But if you've already said goodnight, then I'm not sure bringing the Tony back, that's going to confuse that it wasn't really bedtime. So I think if it's like you're getting called back in every time, that wouldn't be where you'd want to give him entertainment, because you actually want that to be bedtime. Maybe that entertainment, if you want to do it, and a lot of parents do like looking at a star projector, listening to the story on the Tony, something like that. That might be like right before you say goodnight for the last time. So you say, okay, I'm going to put on your stars and I'm going to come back in 10 minutes and it's going to be time to go to bed. And then when you come back in 10 minutes, that is really good night, right? And you can say, I'm going to see you in the morning, or I'm going to check on you 2 more times and I'll be back in the morning, whatever you want that to be. but you want to in general try to eliminate the he screams, you come, and there's a whole negotiation about what to do. So the more you can sort of simplify that by either saying, I'm going to check on you twice. If you keep your body in the bed, I will come back and look at you. And then you do that. So you anticipate him screaming instead of responding to it. Or when you say, I'm going to come back, be really silent, just walk in if he's screaming, and then don't do or sort of honor all of the things he wants you to do. If you get back in that negotiation, it's going to be really, really hard to fall back asleep. So sometimes that silent is just coming in and saying, I'll see you in the morning. I love you very much. And leaving again, instead of getting into the whole like one more story, one more song, all of that kind of stuff.
Thanks, Marielle. So we're close to time, and I just want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about how we can find you and learn more about the parenting community, Cooper.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time, which is always so tricky. That is my email. If anyone is interested in Cooper, please reach out. So, besides getting to do amazing talks like this with partners, we run small parent groups where you're matched with your child's age and stage for parents, any co parents, every month, where we basically learn together on a developmental topic and then talk through support around it. So, would love to introduce you to the Cooper community and all that we have to offer parents. And thrilled to be here. And thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being here, everyone. I've also dropped my contact info in the chat. So please feel free to reach out with any questions, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Asia.
Thanks, guys. Bye.